Everyone warned him not to help her, but when a mountain man found a sealed vault below, he uncovered a secret powerful men had killed to protect for 50 years. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind cut through the Appalachian peaks like a blade that November afternoon, carrying with it the smell of coming snow and something else, something that felt like warning. Jack Harmon stood on the porch of his cabin, coffee mug warming his calloused hands, watching the storm clouds gather over the ridgeline. He was 42 years old, broad-shouldered and quiet, the kind of man who spoke more with his hands than his mouth. His beard was flecked with grey, his flannel shirt worn soft from 1,000 washes, and his boots were the same ones he'd had since his search and rescue days, scuffed, reliable, built to last. The cabin sat 3 miles up a dirt road that most people didn't know existed, tucked into a hollow where the pines grew so thick the sunlight had to fight for every inch. Jack had built most of it himself after he left the volunteer rescue squad 5 years back. Some said he'd gotten tired of saving people who didn't want to be saved. Others said he'd lost someone he couldn't save and never recovered. Both were partly true, but Jack didn't talk about it. He just lived quiet, fixed what needed fixing, and kept to himself. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, squinting at the screen. It was Marlene from the diner down in Ridgeway, the small mountain town that served as the last outpost before the wilderness truly began. "Jack, you up there?" "Yeah, Marlene, what's going on?" Her voice crackled with static and something sharper, concern. "There's a woman been asking around town about the old Thornton property, the one up past Widow's Peak." Jack frowned. The Thornton place had been abandoned for as long as he could remember. 40 years, maybe more. Nobody went up there. The land was cursed, or so people said. More likely it was just forgotten, swallowed by the mountain like so many other things. "What about it?" Jack asked. "She's asking for directions. Driving a beat-up sedan, looks half dead on her feet. Tommy at the gas station told her to turn around. Sheriff Dawes told her the same, but she's insisting." Marlene paused. "Jack, I got a bad feeling about this one. That family, the Thorntons. There's history there, dark history. You know what folks say." Jack did know. He'd heard the stories his whole life. The Thornton family had owned a big piece of land up in the high country, land that bordered state forest and old mining claims. 50 years ago, the family had vanished almost overnight. Some said they'd been run off. Others whispered about something worse. The property had been sealed up, and over the decades, it became one of those places people avoided without really knowing why. "She say what she wants up there?" Jack asked. "No, but she's got that look, you know? Like she's running from something, or running towards something she shouldn't be." Jack watched the storm clouds rolling closer. His instinct, the same one that had pulled him out of bed in the middle of winter nights to search for lost hikers, was already tugging at him. "Thanks for the heads up, Marlene." "Jack," she said, her voice dropping. "Don't get involved. I mean it. Whatever that woman's looking for, it's not your business. People around here, we remember what happened to folks who got tangled up with Thornton affairs." "I hear you," Jack said, but he didn't promise anything. He hung up and stood there for a long moment, the wind picking up around him. The smart thing would be to stay put, finish his coffee, maybe chop some wood before the storm hit. But smart and right weren't always the same thing. 20 minutes later, Jack was in his truck, a 1987 Ford F-250 that ran like a tank and had saved his life more times than he could count. The road down from his cabin was rough, all switchbacks and loose gravel, but he knew every inch of it. By the time he reached the main highway, the first drops of rain were starting to fall. Ridgeway appeared through the mist like a ghost town trying to remember it was alive. Population 312, though that number seemed to shrink every year. There was Marlene's diner, Tommy's gas station, a post office that doubled as a general store, and the sheriff's office tucked into a building that used to be a schoolhouse. The rest was just houses scattered up the hillsides, clinging to the mountain like they were afraid of sliding off. Jack pulled into the gas station. Tommy was outside under the awning, smoking a cigarette and watching the road. He was 60-something, wiry as a fence post, and had lived in these mountains his entire life. "She's gone," Tommy said before Jack could even ask. "Headed up Widow's Peak Road about 20 minutes ago. Told her it was a bad idea. Told her the road washes out. Told her nobody goes up there." He took a drag. "She went anyway." Jack nodded. "What did she look like?" 30s maybe, dark hair, dark eyes. Looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Scared but stubborn. Tommy flicked ash onto the wet pavement. "Jack, whatever you're thinking, don't. That woman's got trouble written all over her, and the Thornton place." He shook his head. "Nothing good ever came from that land." "I'm just going to make sure she doesn't get stuck in the storm," Jack said. Tommy gave him a long look, the kind that said he'd heard that before. "Your funeral." Jack got back in the truck and turned toward Widow's Peak Road. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the windshield into a blur. The road climbed steep and narrow, barely wide enough for one vehicle, with a rock wall on one side and a drop-off on the other. Jack had driven worse, but not many people had. He understood why the woman's sedan might not make it. He found her car about 4 miles up, pulled off to the side at an awkward angle, front wheel in a ditch. The sedan was a late 90s Honda, rusted around the edges, one taillight smashed. It looked like it had been driven hard and fast for a long time. Jack pulled up behind it and got out, rain immediately soaking through his jacket. He approached the driver's side. The woman was still inside, gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. Her knuckles were white. Jack tapped on the window. She jumped, then turned to look at him. Tommy was right. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn, dark circles under her eyes. But there was something else there too. Determination, maybe desperation. She rolled down the window halfway. "I don't need help," she said, her voice hoarse. "Your front wheel says different," Jack replied. "Storm's getting worse. You're not making it anywhere in this." "I have to get to the Thornton property," she said. "It's not far from here." "It's 5 miles, and the road gets worse, not better." Jack wiped rain from his face. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then said, "Sarah." "I'm Jack. Sarah, I don't know what you're looking for up there, but it can wait until the storm passes. Let me give you a ride somewhere safe, and we can figure this out when the weather clears." "You don't understand," she said, her voice cracking. "I can't wait. They're looking for me." Something in the way she said it made Jack go still. "Who's looking for you?" She looked past him, scanning the road behind his truck like she expected someone to appear at any moment. "I can't explain it here, please. If you're offering help, then help me get to the property. That's all I need." Jack had learned a long time ago to trust his gut. Right now, his gut was telling him 2 things. This woman was in real trouble, and whatever she was running from was bigger than a storm. "All right," he said, "but we do this my way. You leave the car. I'll tow it out later if the road doesn't wash it away first. You ride with me, and if I say we turn around, we turn around. Deal?" Sarah grabbed a backpack from the passenger seat, shoved the door open, and climbed out into the rain. She was shorter than he expected, maybe 5'4", wearing jeans and a jacket that wasn't nearly warm enough for mountain weather. She looked at him with eyes that carried the weight of something terrible. "Deal," she said. They got into the truck, and Jack turned the heat up. Sarah sat rigid in the passenger seat, backpack clutched on her lap, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm against the downpour. "You know people in town are going to talk," Jack said as he navigated around a washout. "They warned me not to help you." "They warned me not to come here," Sarah replied, "but I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice." She turned to look at him, and for the first time, he saw something besides fear in her expression. It was anger. Not when your whole life has been built on a lie. Not when you find out everything you were told about your family was designed to keep you away from the truth. Jack didn't respond. He focused on the road, the truck climbing higher into the mountains. The rain was mixed with sleet now, tapping against the metal roof like tiny hammers. After a few minutes, Sarah spoke again, quieter this time. My grandfather was Michael Thornton. He died 3 months ago. I didn't even know he existed until the lawyer called. My mother never mentioned him, never mentioned any of them. She said our family came from Ohio, that we had no ties to this place. Why would she lie about that? Jack asked. Because she was protecting me, or trying to. Sarah pulled an envelope from her backpack. My grandfather left me a letter. He said he'd been waiting 43 years for the right time to tell the truth, but he ran out of time. So he left me instructions. And a key. She held up a brass key, old and tarnished, the kind that looked like it belonged to a bank vault or a prison cell. Instructions to do what? Jack asked. To open what he sealed shut in 1976. To expose what they buried. She looked at him. He said powerful people would do anything to keep it hidden. He said I'd need someone I could trust, someone who wasn't afraid of the truth. Jack felt the weight of those words settle in the truck between them. And you chose a stranger you met on a mountain road? I didn't choose you, Sarah said. But you chose to help. That's more than anyone in that town did. The Thornton property appeared through the rain like a memory trying to surface. A chain-link fence ran along the road, rusted and sagging in places, topped with barbed wire that had gone orange with age. Posted every 50 feet were signs, no trespassing, private property, violators will be prosecuted. The signs looked official, government-issued, not the kind you'd see on personal land. Jack slowed the truck. This doesn't look like private family property. This looks like something federal. That's because they made it federal, Sarah said. After my family disappeared, the land was seized. Eminent domain, they called it. Environmental concerns. But the paperwork my grandfather left shows it was all forged. This land was stolen. Jack pulled up to a gate. It was chained and padlocked, but the chain was newer than everything else, recently replaced. Someone had been here, and not that long ago. Sarah climbed out before Jack could stop her. She had bolt cutters in her backpack. She'd come prepared. Within 30 seconds, the chain fell away and the gate swung open with a rusty shriek. They drove through, the truck bouncing over a road that had been reclaimed by weeds and erosion. The property stretched up the mountainside, dense with old-growth forest and underbrush. After a quarter mile, the road opened into a clearing and Jack saw it, the old Thornton homestead. It was a 2-story house, built from mountain stone and timber, the kind of construction that lasted centuries if you maintained it. But this house hadn't been maintained. Vines covered half the walls, the porch sagged, and several windows were boarded up. Yet despite the decay, there was something deliberate about it. The boards were too neat. The roof, though weathered, hadn't collapsed. Someone had been preserving this place, keeping it from falling apart completely, even while making it look abandoned. Jack killed the engine. The rain hammered the truck roof, and thunder rolled through the mountains like a warning. "This is it," Sarah whispered. They got out and approached the house. Jack's boots crunched on gravel that shouldn't have been there. It was too uniform, too intentional for a place that had supposedly been empty for 43 years. Sarah pulled out the letter her grandfather had left and read by the light of her phone. He says to go around back. There's a root cellar entrance behind the house, built into the hillside. They circled the structure, pushing through overgrown brush and brambles. The back of the property sloped upward into the mountain, and there, half hidden by rhododendron bushes, Jack saw it. A concrete structure built directly into the slope, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. The entrance was a steel door, heavy and industrial, with a complex locking mechanism that looked military-grade. In the center was a keyhole. Sarah's hands shook as she pulled out the brass key. She looked at Jack, her eyes searching his face for something, reassurance maybe, or permission. "Once I open this," she said, "there's no going back. My grandfather's letter said this would put a target on my back, on anyone with me." Jack had spent 5 years trying to live quiet, trying to forget the weight of responsibility that came with helping people. But standing there in the rain, Looking at this woman who'd been brave enough to drive hundreds of miles into hostile territory based on nothing but a dead man's letter, he realized something. Some things were worth the risk. "Open it," he said. Sarah turned the key. There was a deep mechanical click like something massive unlocking. Then she pulled a lever beside the lock, and the steel door hissed as pressure equalized. It swung inward on hinges that barely squeaked, maintained, oiled, ready. Beyond the door was darkness and a set of concrete stairs leading down. Jack pulled a flashlight from his jacket and clicked it on. The beam cut through the black, revealing a descending tunnel that looked more like a military bunker than a root cellar. Sarah took a breath, then stepped inside. Jack followed. The stairs went down 20 feet, maybe more, the walls lined with concrete that looked poured all at once, professional work. At the bottom, they found themselves in a corridor that branched into several rooms. Jack swept the flashlight across the space. What he saw made his breath catch. The first room was an archive. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined with cardboard file boxes, each labeled with dates and codes. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The second room contained filing cabinets, and the third held something else entirely: recording equipment, reel-to-reel machines, cassette players, and stacks of tapes organized by year. Everything was coated in dust but intact, preserved in the cool, dry underground. Sarah moved to the nearest box and opened it. Inside were photographs, aerial shots of mountains being torn apart by machinery, streams running black with runoff, families standing in front of houses with protest signs. Beneath the photos were documents, contracts, memos, financial records. She pulled one out and read aloud, her voice shaking. Memo from Consolidated Mining Corporation to State Senator James Whitfield, dated March 1974. Subject: Acquisition of Thornton Land Tract and resolution of local resistance. She looked up at Jack. "These are bribes, payoffs." Jack moved to another box. This one contained medical records, dozens of them, death certificates, cancer diagnoses, children with birth defects, all from families living in a 5-mile radius of the mining operations. "Your grandfather documented everything," Jack said quietly. Sarah was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she pulled out folder after folder. He was the accountant for Consolidated Mining. He saw what they were doing: the illegal strip mining, the waste dumping, the poisoning of the water supply, and he kept records. For decades he kept records. She found a letter in her grandfather's handwriting, clipped to a folder marked "Final Evidence." Jack read over her shoulder. "To whoever opens this vault, I am Michael Thornton, and I have spent 33 years documenting crimes that powerful men believed they had buried. I worked for them because I was weak, because I had a family to feed, because I told myself someone else would stop them. No one did. By the time I found my courage, it was too late. My family paid the price. They were forced to leave, threatened, their lives destroyed. I stayed behind to finish the work. This vault contains proof of environmental destruction, bribery, manslaughter, and conspiracy reaching the highest levels of state government. Some of the men responsible are still in power. They killed to keep these secrets. They will kill again. Open this only when you have the strength to fight them and someone you trust to stand with you. The truth will not set you free, but it might set others free from what we allowed to happen." Jack and Sarah stood in the underground vault, surrounded by evidence of atrocities that had been hidden for nearly half a century. The rain pounded overhead, but down here, in this tomb of truth, it was silent except for the sound of Sarah's breathing and the rustle of old paper. "We have to get this out," Sarah said. "We have to—" A sound echoed from above. Not thunder, engines. Jack killed his flashlight. They stood in complete darkness, listening. Multiple vehicles had pulled up outside. Doors slammed. Voices carried through the rain, muffled but urgent. "Someone followed us," Jack whispered. Sarah's voice was barely audible. "Or someone's been watching this place the whole time." What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Jack moved silently toward the stairs. Sarah close behind him. He edged up to where he could see through the crack in the doorway. 4 vehicles, black SUVs with tinted windows, the kind that screamed government or corporate security. 6 men, maybe more, fanning out around the property. They wore dark jackets, and Jack caught the glint of something metallic at their hips. Armed. One man stood apart from the others, talking on a phone. He was older, 50-something, with the bearing of someone used to giving orders. Jack couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw the man gesture toward the house, then toward the hillside where they'd entered. "They know about the vault," Jack whispered. "They're searching for the entrance." Sarah's breathing quickened. "How did they know we were here?" Jack thought fast. The town. Someone in Ridgeway must have made a call. Or maybe Sarah's car had been tracked. Or maybe, and this seemed most likely, this place had been under surveillance for years, waiting for someone to finally come looking. "We need another way out," Sarah said. Jack swept his flashlight around the underground space. Most bunkers had emergency exits, especially ones built with this level of paranoia. He moved deeper into the vault, past the archive rooms, and found it. A narrow tunnel at the far end, sloping upward. "Here," he said. "But we need to take evidence with us. If they catch us and this is all we've got, we have nothing." Sarah was already moving, grabbing folders and shoving them into her backpack. Jack joined her, selecting files that looked the most damning. Photographs, signed memos, financial records with names he recognized even from his isolated life in the mountains, state senators, federal judges, the former governor. Above them, footsteps echoed across the property. Closer now. They had maybe 2 minutes. Jack grabbed a box labeled Audio Evidence, 1973 through 1976, and tucked it under his arm. Sarah's backpack was bulging. They moved to the tunnel entrance just as they heard voices at the vault door above. "It's open! Someone's been here! Check below, now!" Jack and Sarah ran. The tunnel was barely 4 feet high, forcing them to crouch as they moved. It smelled of earth and cold stone, and Jack's flashlight revealed nothing but darkness ahead. Behind them, shouts echoed through the vault as the men discovered the archive. The tunnel climbed steeply, then opened into a natural cave formation. Jack recognized the geology. This was one of the old limestone caverns that riddled these mountains, connected to the underground water systems. Michael Thornton had been clever, using the natural landscape to create an escape route that wouldn't show up on any official plans. They emerged through a crack in a rock face about 200 yards from the house, hidden by thick forest. Rain poured down, immediately soaking them. Jack oriented himself by the slope of the mountain and pointed east. "My truck's back at the house, but there's an old logging road half a mile that way. If we can reach it, we can circle back around." They moved through the forest, slipping on wet leaves and exposed roots. Behind them, flashlight beams cut through the trees as the search expanded. The men were professionals, spreading out in a grid pattern, methodical. Jack and Sarah pushed deeper into the wilderness, into terrain Jack knew from his search and rescue days, but that would be treacherous for anyone unfamiliar with these mountains. The storm was getting worse, visibility dropping to nearly zero. That was bad for them, but worse for their pursuers. After 20 minutes of hard climbing, they reached the logging road, barely more than a trail now, overgrown and washed out in places. But it led down the mountain, eventually connecting to a Forest Service road that would take them back toward civilization. Sarah was shaking, from cold and adrenaline and fear. Jack pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Who were those men?" she asked, teeth chattering. "Corporate security, probably, or someone hired to protect whatever's left of Consolidated Mining's reputation." Jack looked back the way they'd come. "Your grandfather was right. These people have been protecting this secret for decades. They're not going to let it go without a fight." "Then what do we do?" Jack thought about the evidence in her backpack and the box under his arm. Thought about the families who'd died or been driven away. Thought about the poisoned water and the lives destroyed. He'd spent 5 years trying to stay out of other people's problems, trying to live quiet and alone. But some things demanded you choose a side. "We do what your grandfather couldn't," Jack said. We get this evidence to someone who can't be bought or scared off. Federal prosecutors, journalists, someone outside the state power structure. They'll come after us, Sarah said. They already are. They walked through the storm, two figures alone against the dark mountain, carrying secrets that powerful men had killed to protect. Jack didn't know if they'd make it, didn't know if the evidence would be enough. But he knew that the woman beside him had driven hundreds of miles on nothing but faith in a dead man's letter, and that took a kind of courage he respected. By the time they reached Jack's cabin, hours later, both were exhausted, soaked to the bone, and jumpy at every sound. Jack had circled back through back roads and old trails, avoiding the main highway. His truck was still at the Thornton property, probably impounded or destroyed by now. Inside the cabin, Jack built a fire while Sarah laid out the evidence on his kitchen table. Folders and photographs covered every surface. Recorded confessions from Michael Thornton detailing meetings where bribes were discussed, where environmental reports were falsified, where families who resisted were threatened. Sarah pulled out her phone. "I'm going to call the FBI." "They'll tell you to come in," Jack said. "And the moment you do, whoever's behind this will know. You'll disappear into protective custody, and the evidence will get buried in bureaucracy for years." Then what? Jack thought about Marlene at the diner, about Tommy at the gas station, about all the people in Ridgeway who'd warned him not to help. They weren't bad people. They were scared people, living in a place where certain families had held power for so long that challenging them seemed impossible. But impossible and wrong weren't the same thing. "We go public first," Jack said. "Journalists, multiple outlets all at once. We flood the zone so it can't be contained. Then we go to the feds with evidence they can't ignore because it's already out there." Sarah stared at him. "You'd do that? Risk everything?" Jack looked at the photographs spread across his table. Families standing in front of dying streams, children with oxygen masks, men and women who'd stood up and been silenced. "I spent 5 years rescuing people from these mountains," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time I rescued them from something else." Outside, the storm began to break. The first rays of dawn filtered through the clouds, painting the peaks in shades of gold and grey. Somewhere down the mountain, powerful men were making phone calls, mobilizing resources, preparing to crush two people who'd dared to open a vault that should have stayed sealed forever. But Jack Harmon and Sarah Thornton weren't running anymore. They were standing their ground. And the truth, buried for 43 years beneath an Appalachian mountain, was about to see daylight. The sun rose over the mountains like a promise that couldn't be kept, painting the ridges in shades of orange and purple, while casting long shadows across the valleys below. Jack stood on his porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the dirt road that led to his cabin. He hadn't slept. Neither had Sarah. They'd spent the night organizing evidence, scanning documents, uploading files to encrypted cloud servers that Sarah insisted were secure. Jack had his doubts. He'd learned long ago that nothing was truly secure when powerful people wanted it gone. But it was better than keeping everything in one place. Sarah emerged from the cabin, wrapped in one of Jack's old flannel shirts over her damp clothes. Her hair was pulled back, dark circles still shadowing her eyes. But there was something different about her this morning. The fear hadn't left, but it had been joined by something harder. Resolve. "I made contact," she said, holding up her phone. "There's a journalist in Charleston, investigative reporter named Marcus Webb. He's done exposés on corporate corruption before. Got a coal company executive sent to prison 3 years ago." "He believe you?" Jack asked. "He wants to see the evidence first. Wants to meet in person." She paused. "He said to come alone." Jack shook his head. "You're not going anywhere alone. Not after last night." "Jack, these people don't know who you are yet. If you stay out of it—" "I'm already in it," he said quietly. "The moment I helped you onto that property, I became part of this. Besides, you think those men didn't get a look at my truck. They know exactly who I am by now." As if summoning a demon by speaking its name, Jack's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Sheriff Dawes. He let it ring 3 times before answering. Jack Harmon, he said. Jack. The sheriff's voice was tight, official. I need you to come down to the station. Got some questions about an incident last night up at the old Thornton property. What kind of incident? The kind where private property gets broken into and documents get stolen. The kind where I got federal agents breathing down my neck asking about a mountain man and a woman in a beat-up Honda. Dawes paused. Jack, I've known you since you were in diapers. Your daddy was a good man. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Who called them, Sheriff? Who made that phone call when Sarah drove into town? Silence on the other end. Then quieter. Sometimes knowing when to back down is the smartest thing a man can do. Come in, Jack. Bring the woman. We'll sort this out proper. Can't do that, Sheriff. Jack. He hung up. Sarah was staring at him, pale. They're not even hiding it anymore, she said. They're just coming straight at us. Jack finished his coffee and set the mug down on the porch railing. Then we need to move fast. Where's this journalist? Charleston, 3 hours south. We'll never make it in a car. They'll have roadblocks up within the hour, if they don't already. Jack thought for a moment, then nodded to himself. We go through the mountains. There's old trails the Forest Service stopped maintaining 20 years ago. I've got a four-wheeler that can handle it. 3 hours by car means what? 6 or 7 through mountain trails? More like 9, Jack admitted. But we'll be off-grid the whole way. No cameras, no checkpoints, no one to report which direction we went. Sarah looked back at the cabin, at the evidence still spread across the kitchen table, at the life she'd stumbled into just 24 hours ago. Then she looked at Jack, this stranger who'd chosen to stand with her when everyone else had warned him away. Let's go, she said. They packed quickly. Jack filled a backpack with supplies, water, energy bars, a first aid kit, flares, and his hunting knife. Sarah secured the most critical documents in waterproof bags and distributed them between both packs. If they got separated, at least one of them would still have evidence. Jack grabbed his rifle from the gun safe, not because he wanted to use it, but because the mountains had more than human threats, and going in unarmed was foolish. The four-wheeler was stored in a shed behind the cabin, a Polaris Sportsman that Jack had rebuilt himself. It started on the second pull, engine rumbling to life like a beast waking from hibernation. Sarah climbed on behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Hold tight, Jack said, and if I tell you to jump, you jump. Don't ask questions. They took off into the forest, following a trail that was barely visible beneath years of fallen leaves and overgrowth. Jack knew these mountains like some men knew city streets. He'd spent his childhood exploring them with his father, his teenage years hunting and fishing them, and his adult years rescuing lost souls from their depths. Every ridge, every hollow, every creek crossing was mapped in his memory. The four-wheeler climbed steep inclines and forded shallow streams, pushing through rhododendron thickets so dense they formed tunnels of green. Sarah held on, her face pressed against Jack's back, feeling every jarring bump and sudden turn. The morning passed into afternoon, the sun climbing high and hot despite the autumn chill. They stopped once, at a clearing where an old fire tower had collapsed decades ago. Jack pulled out his phone, no signal, which was expected this deep in the wilderness. Sarah checked hers. Same. We're alone out here, she said. For now, Jack replied. He scanned the horizon, looking for any sign of pursuit, helicopters mostly. If someone wanted to find them badly enough, air surveillance was the way to do it. But the sky remained clear, just clouds building in the west, another storm rolling in. They ate energy bars and drank water, neither speaking much. Jack studied the map in his head, calculating their route. They'd covered maybe 20 miles, with another 40 to go before they'd hit the back roads that would take them the rest of the way to Charleston. Sarah broke the silence. My grandfather's letter said he stayed behind after his family left, that he spent 33 years gathering evidence. Why didn't he ever release it himself? Jack had wondered the same thing. Fear, maybe. Or he was waiting for the right moment, and the right moment never came. Or he knew that going public would get him killed. and he wanted to live long enough to pass it on to someone who might survive it. Sarah pulled out one of the folders, even here in the wilderness, unable to stop reading through the evidence. There's a memo in here from 1978, Consolidated Mining, discussing the Thornton problem. They reference a permanent solution if Michael doesn't cooperate.
But he did cooperate, Jack said. Publicly, at least. He kept working for them, kept his head down.
While secretly recording everything they did. Sarah looked up. He played weak for 33 years so they'd underestimate him, so they'd think he was controlled. Jack felt a new respect for Michael Thornton, a man he'd never met. It took a special kind of courage to live a double life for that long, to smile at the people destroying your community while documenting their crimes. Most men would have broken, would have run or given in completely. "Come on," Jack said, standing. "We've got ground to cover." They rode on, pushing deeper into the backcountry. The terrain grew rougher, the trail disappearing entirely in places, forcing Jack to navigate by instinct and memory. They crossed a ridge that offered a view of the valley below, and Jack's blood went cold. 3 black SUVs were parked at a trailhead 5 miles south, tiny from this distance but unmistakable. Men were unloading equipment, packs, what looked like GPS devices, maybe tracking dogs. "They're trying to cut us off," Jack said. "They know the general direction we're headed." Sarah's grip tightened on his jacket. How did they know? Same way they knew about the vault. They've been watching, waiting. Your grandfather probably left traces over the years, things they couldn't quite connect. The moment you showed up, they knew someone would eventually open that vault. Jack turned the four-wheeler east, away from the valley and deeper into the high country. It would add hours to their journey, maybe a full day, but it would keep them away from the search parties. The problem was, going higher meant going into territory that got dangerous after dark, especially with a storm coming. They had no choice. The afternoon stretched long and hard. The four-wheeler struggled over rocky terrain, its engine whining in protest. Sarah's arms ached from holding on, her legs cramped from the constant tension. But she didn't complain. Jack glanced back once and saw her jaw set, her eyes focused ahead. She was tougher than she looked. By late afternoon, they reached a place Jack hadn't been in years, an old mining camp from the early 1900s, long abandoned, nothing left but collapsed structures and rusted equipment scattered among the trees. But there was also a mine entrance, boarded up with rotting planks, a tunnel that went deep into the mountain. Jack stopped the four-wheeler and dismounted. His legs were stiff, his back tight from hours of riding. Sarah climbed off, stumbling slightly, catching herself against a tree. "Why are we stopping?" she asked. "Because we need to talk about what comes next," Jack said. He pulled out his phone, still no signal, and checked the compass. "We're maybe 30 miles from the nearest road that'll get us to Charleston. That's another 5-6 hours of hard riding, and the sun's going down in 2. We push through in the dark. We risk the four-wheeler breaking down or one of us getting hurt. We stop for the night. We give them time to close the gap." Sarah looked at the old mine entrance. "Could we hide in there?" "Maybe, but mines are dangerous. Cave-ins, bad air, unstable ground." Jack paused. "There's another option. About 10 miles north, there's a fire lookout station, still maintained by the Forest Service, stocked with emergency supplies. We could hole up there, use their radio to call for help." "Help from who? The sheriff's compromised. You said yourself we can't trust local authorities." "Federal authorities are different. Park rangers, Forest Service law enforcement. They're outside the local power structure." Jack looked at her. "But it means revealing our location. The moment we make that call, everyone will know where we are." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then she said, "What if we split up? You take some of the evidence to the lookout station, make the call, draw them there. I take the rest and push on to Charleston, meet the journalist." "Absolutely not," Jack said. "You wouldn't last 6 hours alone out here." "You don't know that." "I do know that. These mountains will kill you faster than any hired gun if you don't know what you're doing." He softened his tone. "Sarah, I understand what you're trying to do. You don't want me taking more risk than I already have, but we're in this together now. We survive together or not at all." Tears welled in her eyes, the first real emotion she'd shown since they'd fled the vault. "I never wanted anyone else to get hurt because of this. My grandfather carried this burden alone for so long. I thought I could too. And look where that got him. 33 years of secret keeping, and he died without ever seeing justice done." Jack put a hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone help carry the weight." A sound echoed through the forest, distant but distinct. Helicopters. Jack's head snapped up. There were 2 of them, maybe 3, sweeping back and forth across the ridges to the south. They were miles away but getting closer, running a search pattern. "They brought air support," Sarah whispered, "which means they're serious." Jack made a decision. "We hide, now." They grabbed their packs and moved toward the mine entrance. Jack kicked away the rotting boards, revealing a dark opening that exhaled cool, damp air. He clicked on his flashlight and led the way inside, Sarah close behind. The tunnel was about 6 feet high, shored up with old timber that creaked ominously. The walls were wet with seepage, and the floor was littered with debris. Broken tools, rusted rail tracks, fragments of ore carts. Jack moved carefully, testing each step, aware that mine collapses could happen without warning. They went about 50 feet in, far enough that they wouldn't be visible from the entrance, but not so deep that they'd risk getting trapped. Jack found a widening in the tunnel where the miners had excavated a small chamber, probably a rest area or equipment storage. He set down his pack and turned off the flashlight. Darkness swallowed them whole. They sat in silence, listening. The helicopter sound grew louder, the distinctive whomp-whomp-whomp of rotors echoing off the mountains. It passed overhead, so close that Jack could feel the vibration in his chest. Then it moved on, circling, searching. Sarah's voice came out of the darkness, barely a whisper. "How long do we wait?" "Until they move the search to another area. Could be hours." They sat in the dark, the mine around them silent except for the occasional drip of water and the distant sound of the helicopters. Jack's mind worked through scenarios, possibilities, escape routes. Every option seemed to narrow into the same conclusion. They were running out of time and space. "Tell me about him," Jack said suddenly. "Your grandfather, what was he like?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, "I never knew him. Like I said, my mother never told me he existed. But from his letters, from the evidence he left, he was meticulous, careful. Every document is dated, cross-referenced, organized. He thought like an accountant, but he felt like a father. There are notes in the margins, personal observations. He'd write things like, 'Saw the Henderson boy today, the one with leukemia from the water. He's 8, this has to stop.'" Her voice cracked. He knew what they were doing was killing people, and he documented it all while pretending to be on their side. Can you imagine how that must have eaten at him? Shaking hands with murderers every day, going to meetings, processing their paperwork, all while secretly recording every word. Jack thought about the kind of strength that required, the kind of discipline. He was a soldier in a war nobody knew was being fought. "And he died thinking he'd lost," Sarah said. "That's what his letter said. I'm out of time and I failed to stop them. Maybe you'll have better luck." He gave up on himself, but not on the truth. The helicopters had moved off, their sound fading to the north. Jack waited another 10 minutes, then clicked on his flashlight. "We should move while we have the chance." They emerged from the mine into twilight. The sun had dropped behind the western peaks, painting the sky in deep purples and reds. The storm Jack had seen building earlier was closer now, dark clouds rolling over the mountains like a physical thing. They mounted the four-wheeler and rode north toward the fire lookout station. The trail climbed steeply, the engine straining, wheels slipping on loose rock. Jack pushed the machine hard, knowing they needed to reach shelter before the storm hit and before their pursuers adjusted their search pattern. Night fell fast in the mountains, the darkness absolute beneath the forest canopy. Jack navigated by memory and the dim glow of the four-wheeler's headlight, trusting instincts he'd honed over decades. Sarah held on, her face buried against his back, exhausted beyond words. The lookout station appeared like a ghost in the darkness, a small wooden structure perched on a steel tower 60 feet above the ground, accessible only by a narrow staircase that switchbacked up the tower's frame. Jack killed the engine and dismounted, every muscle screaming in protest. "We made it," Sarah said, her voice hoarse. "Almost," Jack replied. He looked up at the tower, barely visible against the night sky. "Still got to climb." The stairs were old but solid, built to last by men who'd understood that lives depended on their work. Jack went first, testing each step, the wind picking up as they climbed higher. By the time they reached the cabin at the top, the first drops of rain were falling. Inside, the lookout station was sparse but functional. A single room with windows on all sides, a desk with maps and emergency equipment, a two-way radio mounted on the wall, and a small cot in the corner. Solar panels on the roof kept a battery bank charged, providing enough power for lights and the radio. Jack flipped the switches. Lights buzzed to life, and the radio crackled with static. He tuned it to the Forest Service emergency frequency. "This is Jack Harmon, broadcasting from Lookout Station 7A. I have a civilian in distress and need immediate assistance from federal law enforcement. Please respond." Static. Then, "Station 7A, this is Ranger Command. Identify yourself and state your emergency." Jack took a breath. This was it. The moment they went from fugitives to witnesses under protection, or the moment they painted a target on their exact location. "I have evidence of environmental crimes and corruption involving state officials. I need to speak with federal agents, FBI or EPA, whoever can get here fastest. And I need protection. There are people hunting us." A long pause. "Station 7A, maintain your position. We're dispatching rangers to your location. ETA 90 minutes. Do not leave the station." Jack released the transmit button and looked at Sarah. "Now we wait." She nodded, too tired to speak. She sank onto the cot, her backpack still clutched in her arms like a lifeline. Outside, the storm hit with full force. Rain hammered the windows, and wind shook the tower, making the whole structure sway slightly. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the mountains in brief, stark flashes. Jack stood at the window, watching the forest below. Somewhere out there, men with resources and motivation were hunting them, and he'd just told them exactly where to find them. But he'd also called for help from people who couldn't be easily bought or intimidated. Federal rangers, federal agents. They operated outside the local corruption, outside the web of favors and threats that kept small-town secrets buried. At least that's what Jack hoped. Sarah fell asleep on the cot, exhausted beyond her limits. Jack covered her with an emergency blanket from the supplies and kept watch. The rain continued, relentless, and the tower swayed in the wind like a ship at sea. An hour passed, then another. Jack's eyes grew heavy, but he fought against sleep. The radio crackled occasionally with routine traffic from other stations, but nothing about their location. Then he saw them, lights in the forest below, moving through the trees. Not flashlights, vehicle headlights. His heart sank. 90 minutes hadn't passed yet. The rangers weren't due for another 20-30 minutes, which meant these weren't rangers. Jack moved to the radio and keyed the transmit button. "Ranger Command, this is Station 7A. I have unknown vehicles approaching my position. Please advise." "Station 7A, the response team is still 25 minutes out. The vehicles are not ours. Recommend you secure your position and maintain communication." Jack looked at the stairs. The only way up or down. They were trapped. He grabbed his rifle and checked the chamber. Loaded. He'd hoped it wouldn't come to this, but hope was a luxury he could no longer afford. Sarah woke at the sound of him chambering around. "What's happening?" "Company," Jack said, "and they're not friendly." She moved to the window and looked down. There were 4 vehicles now, parked at the base of the tower. Men were getting out, maybe 8 or 10 of them, all armed. One of them raised a megaphone. His voice boomed through the storm. "Jack Harmon, you're trespassing on restricted property and in possession of stolen documents. Come down now, and we can resolve this peacefully.
Jack recognized the voice, not personally, but the type. Corporate security, ex-military, the kind of men who did what they were told and didn't ask questions about right or wrong. He opened a window and shouted back, "I've already called Federal Rangers. They're on their way. You need to leave."
"We're not going anywhere. You have 5 minutes to come down or we're coming up."
Jack closed the window and turned to Sarah. "There's no way out." She was pale but steady. "Then we make our stand here."
"Sarah, I can't protect you if they come up those stairs. It's too confined, too—"
"I didn't ask you to protect me," she said, her voice firm. "I asked you to help me get the truth out. We called for help. We uploaded the evidence. Even if they kill us, the story's already out there waiting." Jack stared at her, this woman who'd driven into hostile territory on nothing but faith in a dead man's letter, who'd opened a vault that powerful men had killed to keep sealed, who now stood in a watchtower surrounded by armed men and refused to give up. "Your grandfather would have been proud of you," Jack said quietly. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "He would have been proud of you too." Below, the men began to climb. Thunder cracked across the mountains, and lightning illuminated the darkness like the crack of doom itself. Jack Harmon stood at the top of the tower with a rifle in his hands, a woman at his back, and the weight of 43 years of buried truth pressing down on them both. This was where everything changed. This was where the fight truly began. The footsteps on the metal stairs rang out like a death march, slow and deliberate, echoing even above the storm. Jack counted them in his head, at least 6 men climbing, maybe more waiting below. The tower swayed in the wind, and rain lashed against the windows with such force it sounded like gravel being thrown against glass. Sarah stood behind him, her back pressed against the far wall, the backpack of evidence clutched to her chest. Her face was pale but set with determination. She'd pulled out her phone and was recording, documenting everything, even now refusing to let the moment pass without witness. Jack positioned himself at the door, rifle aimed at the top of the staircase visible through the small window. His hands were steady, muscle memory from his years in search and rescue, from the times he'd had to make life or death decisions in seconds. But his heart hammered against his ribs because this was different. This wasn't saving someone from a cliff face or pulling them from a frozen river. This was standing between armed men and a truth they'd kill to keep buried. The lead man appeared at the top of the stairs, his face obscured by a rain-slicked hood. He stopped just outside the door, smart enough not to make himself an easy target.
"Harmon," he shouted over the storm, "this doesn't have to end badly. Nobody wants bloodshed. Just hand over the documents and the woman, and you can walk away." "The woman has a name," Sarah shouted before Jack could respond, "and I'm not going anywhere with you." "Ma'am, you're in possession of stolen property. Corporate documents taken from a secured facility. We're authorized to retrieve them by any means necessary." Jack's jaw tightened. "Authorized by who? Those documents belong to Michael Thornton, and he left them to his granddaughter. You've got no legal claim." "The property was seized under eminent domain in 1976. Everything on that land, including what was in that vault, became federal property. You broke into a federal facility." It was a lie, and they all knew it. But it was a lie backed by guns and men willing to use them. Jack made a decision. He cracked open the door, rifle still trained on the stairs. "You want to talk legal? Fine. Federal Rangers are 20 minutes out. We'll let them sort through the jurisdictional questions. Until then, you need to back down those stairs." The man didn't move. "We can't do that." "Then we've got a problem." For a long moment, nobody moved. The wind howled and lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the standoff in stark white flashes. Jack could see 5 men on the stairs now, all armed with pistols or compact rifles. Professional gear, professional posture. These weren't local rent-a-cops. These were serious operators. Then Sarah did something Jack didn't expect. She stepped forward into view of the men on the stairs and held up her phone. "I'm recording everything," she shouted, "and it's uploading in real time. Every word you've said, every threat you've made. If you kill us, the whole world will see it. Is that what your employers want? The lead man hesitated. Jack saw it in his posture, the slight shift of weight. Whatever orders these men had been given, they probably didn't include creating martyrs on camera. Ma'am, put the phone down. No, you want these documents? You're going to have to murder us on video to get them. And then you're going to have to explain to the FBI, the EPA, and every news organization in the country why corporate security killed 2 people over financial records. It was a bluff. The upload was probably failing in this storm, the signal too weak to transmit more than a few seconds of footage. But the men on the stairs didn't know that, and doubt was a powerful weapon. The lead man pulled back slightly, talking into a radio Jack couldn't hear. Orders were being given, decisions made by people who weren't standing in the rain. Then the man spoke again. His tone changed. All right, we're backing off, but you're not leaving this tower. We wait for the Rangers together, let them sort it out. Jack didn't believe him for a second, but he nodded. Fine. But you wait at the bottom, all of you. I see anyone on these stairs again before the Rangers arrive, and we've got a different conversation. The men retreated down the staircase, their boots clanging against metal. Jack watched them descend, counting heads. 6 had climbed, 6 went down. That left at least 4 more at the vehicles. He closed the door and locked it, a flimsy lock that wouldn't stop anyone determined. But it was something. They're not giving up, Sarah said, lowering her phone with shaking hands. They're just changing tactics. I know. Jack moved to the windows, scanning the perimeter. The vehicles hadn't moved, their headlights still cutting through the rain. Men stood in clusters, talking, gesturing, planning. The radio crackled. Station 7A, this is Ranger Command. We're 15 minutes from your position. Sit tight. Jack keyed the transmit. Command, be advised, I have approximately 10 armed individuals at my location claiming federal authority. They've attempted to enter the station by force. I need you to contact FBI and request immediate backup. A pause. Copy that, 7A. We're expediting arrival and contacting federal law enforcement. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Copy. Jack set down the radio and looked at Sarah. She'd stopped shaking, her jaw set in that expression he'd come to recognize, the one that said she'd crossed some internal line and wasn't coming back. Whatever happens, she said quietly, thank you for not driving past, for not turning away. Don't talk like that, Jack said. We're getting out of this. Maybe not, but at least we tried. At least someone finally tried. The minutes crawled by like hours. Jack kept watch. Sarah organized the evidence one final time, separating the most damning documents into a separate waterproof bag that she could grab quickly if needed. Outside, the storm showed no signs of letting up, and the men below showed no signs of leaving. Then Jack saw movement that made his stomach drop. 2 of the men were approaching the base of the tower carrying something, bolt cutters and what looked like a small blowtorch. They're going to cut through the stairs, Jack said. Sarah joined him at the window. Can they do that? The tower's steel, but the stairs are connected with bolts. They cut enough of them, the whole staircase could collapse. Jack thought fast. They're not trying to come up anymore. They're trying to trap us. Cut the stairs, wait for the Rangers, claim we're dangerous, armed, unstable. By the time the truth comes out, the evidence will have disappeared. Then we climb down before they finish cutting. Jack looked at the storm, at the 60-foot drop, at the swaying tower. In this weather? That's suicide. So is staying here. She was right. Jack hated that she was right. But she was. He grabbed a coil of emergency rope from the supply cabinet, 100 feet of static line used for emergency descents. It wasn't climbing rope, wasn't rated for what he was about to do, but it was what they had. I'll go first, he said, tying the rope to the support beam that ran through the center of the cabin. Anchor myself below, then guide you down. You ever rappelled before? Does a ropes course at summer camp count? Not even a little. Jack secured the rifle across his back and tested the knot. It held. He opened the window on the north side of the tower, away from where the men were working on the stairs. The wind immediately howled through the opening, and rain soaked everything within seconds.
He fed the rope out the window, watching it disappear into the darkness below. No way to know if it reached the ground, but it was long enough. Probably. "When I signal," he told Sarah, "you climb out and wrap the rope around your waist like I show you. Keep 3 points of contact with the tower at all times. Don't look down, don't think, just move." She nodded, eyes wide but focused. Jack climbed out into the storm. The tower swayed violently in the wind, and the rain hit him like needles. He wrapped the rope around his body in a hasty harness and began to descend, using the tower's framework for handholds and footholds. Every gust of wind threatened to tear him loose, and the metal was slick with rain. But he moved with practiced efficiency, years of mountain rescue kicking in. Halfway down, he heard shouting from below. They'd been spotted. Jack looked down and saw 2 men running toward his position, flashlights cutting through the rain. He had maybe 30 seconds before they reached the tower's base. He slid the rest of the way down, rope burning through his gloves, and hit the ground hard. His ankle screamed in protest, but he ignored it. He unslung the rifle and fired a shot into the air. The crack echoed through the storm, and the 2 men dove for cover. "Federal Rangers are 3 minutes out," Jack shouted. "You touch that tower again, and I start aiming lower." The men stayed down, but Jack could see others moving through the trees, trying to flank his position. He was outnumbered and outgunned, and Sarah was still 60 feet up in a swaying tower. He looked up and saw her climbing out the window, the rope wrapped around her waist. She moved slowly, terrified but determined, finding handholds where he'd shown her. "That's it," he called up. "Nice and steady, don't rush." A shot rang out, and wood splintered on the tower frame inches from Sarah's hand. She screamed and nearly lost her grip. Jack spun and fired toward the muzzle flash, not aiming to hit, but to suppress. "The next person who fires at her, I put a round through." The shooting stopped, but the men were still advancing, using the vehicles and trees for cover. Sarah continued her descent, moving faster now, panic overriding caution. She was 20 feet from the ground when her foot slipped. She swung out wildly, slamming into the tower frame with a cry of pain. The rope held, but she was dangling now, unable to find purchase on the slick metal. Jack slung the rifle and grabbed the rope, hauling her down hand over hand. His injured ankle threatened to buckle, but he gritted his teeth and pulled. Sarah dropped the last 8 feet, and Jack caught her, both of them tumbling to the muddy ground. "Can you run?" he asked. She nodded, gasping. They ran into the forest, leaving the tower and the men behind. Jack knew these woods, knew which direction would take them toward the access road where the Rangers would arrive. He could hear the men giving chase, crashing through the underbrush, but the storm and the darkness gave him and Sarah an advantage. They were smaller, quieter, and Jack knew where he was going. They'd covered maybe 200 yards when Jack heard it, the distinctive whine of helicopter rotors cutting through the storm. But this wasn't the corporate helicopters from before. This was bigger, official. A searchlight stabbed down through the trees, sweeping back and forth. Jack pulled Sarah behind a massive oak and keyed his radio. "Ranger Command, this is Jack Harmon. I'm in the forest 200 yards northeast of the tower. The armed men are in pursuit. I need immediate assistance." The radio crackled. "Jack Harmon, this is FBI Special Agent Chen. We're overhead. Mark your position." Jack pulled a flare from his pocket, struck it, and held it high. The red light cut through the rain like a beacon. The helicopter banked toward them, its searchlight finding them within seconds. The downdraft from the rotors turned the rain into a horizontal assault. But Jack had never been so happy to be soaked and battered by wind. A voice boomed from the helicopter's loudspeaker. "This is the FBI. All armed individuals, drop your weapons and put your hands on your heads. This area is now under federal jurisdiction." The men pursuing them stopped, caught in the searchlight. Jack could see the moment they realized it was over. The slump of shoulders, the lowering of weapons. Corporate security or not, nobody wanted to engage federal agents. Within minutes, the forest was swarming with Rangers and FBI agents. Jack and Sarah were separated, wrapped in emergency blankets, and questioned by different agents. Jack told his story 3 times to 3 different people, his voice hoarse from shouting over the storm. Finally, a woman in an FBI windbreaker approached him. She was 50-ish, sharp-eyed, with the bearing of someone who'd seen everything and believed nothing until proven. "Mr. Harmon, I'm Special Agent Patricia Chen. We've secured the individuals who were pursuing you. They're claiming they were authorized to retrieve stolen corporate documents." "They're lying," Jack said flatly. "Those documents were left to Sarah Thornton by her grandfather. They're evidence of environmental crimes, bribery and conspiracy going back to the 1970s.
We'll need to verify that. Where's the evidence now?"
Jack pointed to where Sarah sat in the back of a Ranger vehicle, the backpack still clutched in her arms. "She's got some of it. The rest is uploaded to secure servers. We weren't taking chances."
Agent Chen studied him for a long moment. "You know you're probably going to be arrested for breaking and entering, trespassing on federal property, and about a dozen other charges."
"I figured. You also probably saved that woman's life. And if what you're saying is true, you may have exposed one of the longest-running cover-ups in state history." She paused. "That doesn't make you a hero, but it doesn't make you a criminal either. We'll sort it out." She walked away, leaving Jack standing in the rain, exhausted beyond measure but still standing. Sarah broke away from the agent questioning her and ran to Jack, throwing her arms around him. "They're taking the evidence. They're going to investigate. It's really happening." Jack held her, feeling the weight of the last 48 hours finally settling on his shoulders. They'd survived. Against odds that should have crushed them, they'd survived. But as he looked around at the federal agents securing the scene, at the corporate security men being handcuffed and read their rights, at the evidence bags being filled with documents that would destroy careers and lives, Jack realized something. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The real fight, the legal battles, the media scrutiny, the threats and intimidation that would come from desperate men with everything to lose, that was all still ahead. But for tonight, they'd won. They'd taken a secret buried for 43 years and dragged it into the light. And sometimes that was enough. The FBI set up a command post at the base of the tower, portable lights cutting through the darkness and illuminating the chaos. Jack sat on the bumper of a Ranger truck, a paramedic wrapping his ankle while Agent Chen coordinated teams. Sarah was 20 feet away, giving her statement to two other agents, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that had to be crushing her. One of the corporate security men was shouting about lawyers and unlawful detention. Another sat silently in the back of an FBI vehicle, staring at nothing. Jack recognized that look, the look of a man realizing he'd been on the wrong side of history, and there was no walking it back. Agent Chen returned, a tablet in her hand showing scanned images of the documents Sarah had surrendered. "Mr. Harmon, I've been doing this for 22 years. I've seen corporate fraud, political corruption, environmental crimes. This," she gestured at the tablet, "this is all of them combined. If these documents are authentic, and our preliminary assessment suggests they are, you've handed us evidence of systematic poisoning of water supplies, falsified environmental reports submitted to federal agencies, bribery of state officials, and conspiracy to cover up industrial manslaughter." "Michael Thornton spent 33 years gathering that evidence," Jack said. "He died thinking it would never see daylight." "He was wrong." Chen sat down beside him. "We'll need both you and Miss Thornton to come to Charleston, give formal depositions. You'll probably need lawyers. The state AG's office will want to talk to you, and there will be congressional inquiries. This is going to get big, and it's going to get ugly." "I just wanted to help someone who needed help," Jack said quietly. "I know. But you helped expose something that powerful people spent half a century trying to hide. They're going to come at you with everything they have. Lawsuits, character assassination, threats. You need to be prepared for that." Jack looked at Sarah, saw her pushing wet hair from her face, saw the way she held herself, bruised, exhausted but unbroken. "She's prepared, and I'm not abandoning her now." Chen nodded slowly. "Good, because she's going to need someone steady when this hits the news cycle." The storm was finally breaking, the rain easing to a drizzle. Through the clouds, Jack could see the first hints of dawn touching the eastern sky. They'd been running, fighting, surviving for nearly 48 hours straight. His body screamed for rest, but his mind was still racing. One of the FBI agents approached Chen with a laptop. "Ma'am, we've confirmed the upload. Miss Thornton sent encrypted files to 4 different news organizations and 2 federal oversight agencies before she lost signal. The cat's already out of the bag." Chen smiled grimly. "Then we'd better move fast before the cover-up machine starts spinning." By full daylight, the scene had transformed. News helicopters circled overhead, kept at bay by FBI orders but filming everything they could. The access road was clogged with federal vehicles, and Jack counted at least 30 agents combing through the area. Sarah sat beside him now, both of them wrapped in blankets, drinking terrible coffee from paper cups provided by the Rangers. Neither had slept, but neither seemed ready to close their eyes. "My grandfather would have loved this," Sarah said softly. "All these federal agents, all this attention. He spent so long being invisible, pretending to be weak. He would have loved seeing them squirm." "You think he knew?" Jack asked. "That it would eventually come out?" "I think he hoped. That's different than knowing." She turned to look at Jack. "What you did, stopping for me, helping me open that vault, standing with me when everyone else ran. Why? You didn't know me, didn't owe me anything." Jack thought about that question. He'd been asking himself the same thing since Marlene's phone call seemed like a lifetime ago. 5 years ago, I was part of a search and rescue team," he said. "We got a call about a hiker lost on the north face of Bald Mountain. Storm was coming in, visibility was dropping, command wanted to wait until morning. I pushed to go immediately. My partner agreed with command. We argued. I went alone." He paused, remembering. "Found the hiker 3 hours later, hypothermic, barely conscious. Got her down just as the storm hit. She lived. But my partner never forgave me for going against orders, for taking the risk. He said I had a hero complex, that I couldn't tell the difference between saving someone and throwing my own life away." "But you saved her," Sarah said. "Yeah, and maybe he was right. Maybe I do have a complex, but I can't drive past someone who needs help. Doesn't matter if it's a lost hiker or a stranger with a story about a sealed vault. I just can't do it." Sarah reached over and took his hand. "The world needs more people who can't drive past." Agent Chen interrupted them. "We're moving you both to Charleston. Federal protection until we sort through the jurisdictional mess. You'll be in safe houses, separate locations for security. We'll coordinate your depositions and handle media requests." "How long?" Jack asked. "Days, maybe weeks. Depends on how fast the state AG moves and whether any of the implicated officials try to flee or destroy additional evidence." She looked at them both seriously. "You need to understand. People are going to lose everything because of what you've exposed. Careers, reputations, freedom. Desperate people do desperate things. Until we have everyone in custody, you're both at risk." Jack stood, his ankle protesting but holding. "I understand." They were loaded into separate vehicles, Jack in an FBI SUV, Sarah in another. As they pulled away from the tower, Jack looked back at the structure swaying in the morning light. 60 feet of steel and determination, where 2 people had made a stand against odds that should have crushed them. The drive to Charleston took 4 hours, most of it in silence. Jack stared out the window at the mountains rolling past, thinking about his cabin, his quiet life, the solitude he'd built for himself after leaving search and rescue. All of that was gone now. Even if he wanted to go back, even if the legal troubles cleared and the threats subsided, he could never return to that isolation. He'd stepped into the world again, and the world didn't let go easily. The safe house was a nondescript apartment in a residential neighborhood, guarded by 2 agents who'd be there 24/7. Jack was given fresh clothes, a phone with a secure line, and instructions not to contact anyone without clearing it with the FBI first. He showered for the first time in 2 days, watching mud and pine needles swirl down the drain. When he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. His face was scratched from branches, his eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion, and his beard was matted with dirt. But there was something else there too, something he hadn't seen in a long time. Purpose. He'd spent 5 years running from responsibility, from the weight of other people's lives. But helping Sarah had reminded him of something he'd forgotten, The weight was heavy, but it was also real. It meant something, and meaning, he was learning, mattered more than comfort. That evening, Agent Chen visited with updates. The story broke 2 hours ago. Every major news outlet is running it. Corporate cover-up exposed after 43 years. Whistleblower reveals decades of environmental crimes. The state AG has announced a full investigation. 3 state senators have already issued statements denying involvement.
Anyone in custody yet? Jack asked.
2 mid-level consolidated mining executives. We're building cases against the others, but these things take time. The company's lawyers are already trying to discredit the evidence, calling it fabricated. She paused. How are you holding up?
I'm fine.
You're not fine. Nobody would be fine after what you've been through. There's a counselor available if you want to talk.
Jack shook his head. I just want to make sure Sarah's safe.
She's asking about you too. Wants to know you're all right. Chen smiled slightly. You two made quite a team. Most people would have given up, would have handed over the evidence when those men showed up at the tower. But you didn't.
Giving up wasn't an option.
It's always an option. You chose not to take it. That's different. She stood to leave. We'll need your formal deposition tomorrow. Get some rest. The real work starts now. After she left, Jack lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. His body ached, his ankle throbbed, and his mind wouldn't stop replaying the last 48 hours. The vault opening, the chase through the mountains, the standoff at the tower. Sarah's face when she realized they might not survive. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number routed through FBI security. Thank you for not driving past. S. Jack smiled and typed back, thank you for not giving up. Get some rest. He set the phone down and closed his eyes. Outside, the city hummed with normal life, people going to dinner, watching television, unaware that 2 strangers had just torn apart a conspiracy that had poisoned their state for 43 years. Tomorrow, the lawyers would come. The depositions would begin. The fight to make the evidence stick, to turn documents and recordings into actual justice. That fight would consume weeks or months. But tonight, Jack Harmon allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in 5 years. He'd helped someone who needed help. He'd stood for something that mattered. And he'd proven that sometimes one person choosing not to drive past was all it took to change everything. The mountains where he'd made his home would still be there when this was over. His cabin would be waiting. But he wasn't sure he'd go back to living alone, isolated, separate from the world's problems. Because some doors, once opened, couldn't be closed again. And Jack was beginning to think that was exactly how it should be. The depositions began 3 days later in a federal building that looked more like a fortress than an office. Jack sat across from attorneys representing the state AG, the EPA, the FBI, and something called the Environmental Crimes Task Force. They asked him the same questions in different ways for 6 hours straight, recording every word, every pause, every detail of how he'd met Sarah Thornton and what they'd found in that vault. He told them everything. The warning from Marlene, the drive up Widow's Peak Road, Sarah's desperation, the sealed vault, the evidence, the chase, the tower, all of it laid bare for the legal record. When they finally released him, Agent Chen was waiting outside the conference room. How'd it go? She asked. Feel like I just ran a marathon with my mouth, Jack said. They believe us? They believe the evidence. Your testimony just confirms the chain of custody and establishes that you weren't part of some elaborate hoax. She handed him a tablet. You should see this. It went live an hour ago. Jack took the device and watched the news report. A journalist named Marcus Webb, the same one Sarah had been trying to reach, stood in front of the Thornton property, now cordoned off with federal tape. Behind him, agents in hazmat suits were entering the vault. This is the site where, according to federal investigators, one of the longest-running environmental cover-ups in American history was hidden for more than 4 decades, Webb said into the camera. Michael Thornton, an accountant for Consolidated Mining Corporation, spent 33 years secretly documenting illegal strip mining, water contamination, and the systematic poisoning of rural communities across 3 counties.
The evidence suggests that at least 18 families were directly harmed, and dozens more may have been affected by contaminated water supplies that state officials were allegedly bribed to ignore. The report cut to interview footage with Agent Chen. "We are looking at potential charges including conspiracy, environmental crimes, bribery of public officials, and negligent homicide. This investigation will likely span multiple years and involve both state and federal jurisdictions." Then the reporter's face filled the screen again. The story only came to light because of two people: Sarah Thornton, the granddaughter of the whistleblower, and Jack Harmon, a former search and rescue volunteer who chose to help a stranger when everyone else warned him away. Tonight, we ask, how many other secrets remain buried because no one is brave enough to dig? Jack handed back the tablet. "They're making us sound like heroes." "You are heroes," Chen said simply, "whether you want to be or not." That evening, Jack was finally allowed to see Sarah. They met in a neutral location, a conference room in the federal building, with agents stationed outside. She looked better than the last time he'd seen her, showered and rested, wearing clean clothes that someone had brought her, but her eyes still carried the weight of everything they'd been through. They stood awkwardly for a moment. Then Sarah crossed the room and hugged him tight. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "That this is all going to disappear, and I'll be back in my apartment with just a letter and a key and no idea what to do." "It's real," Jack said. "And it's working. They're investigating. They're taking it seriously." She pulled back, wiping at her eyes. "Agent Chen said there are already 3 lawsuits filed against me. Consolidated Mining, 2 law firms representing state officials. They're claiming I stole confidential documents, that I'm liable for defamation, that I—" Her voice broke. "Jack, I don't have money for lawyers. I was working 2 part-time jobs just to pay rent. How am I supposed to fight corporations and politicians?" "You're not fighting alone," Jack said. "There are advocacy groups, environmental lawyers who work pro bono, people who've been waiting for a case like this. They'll come." "Will they come for you too? Because Chen said they're going after you as well. Breaking and entering, trespassing, theft of property. They're trying to discredit us by making us look like criminals." Jack had expected this. The powerful always fought back, and their first weapon was always the law, twisted and wielded to protect themselves rather than pursue justice. "Let them come," he said quietly. "We did the right thing. The evidence speaks for itself. Everything else is just noise." Sarah looked at him with something like wonder. "How are you so calm?" "I'm not calm. I'm just too tired to panic." He smiled slightly. "And I've learned something over the years. The more desperate they get, the more it means you're winning." Over the next 2 weeks, the case exploded into a national story. Environmental groups rallied around Sarah, providing legal representation and media training. Families who'd been affected by the contamination came forward, adding their voices to the chorus demanding justice. A class action lawsuit was filed against Consolidated Mining, seeking damages for medical expenses, property devaluation, and emotional suffering. But the backlash was fierce. Conservative media outlets ran stories questioning Sarah's motives and Jack's background. They dug up his resignation from search and rescue, framing it as evidence of instability. They found a DUI charge from 15 years ago and presented it as if Jack was a criminal. They interviewed people from Ridgeway who said Jack had always been a loner, always been strange, implying he was dangerous. Jack watched it all from his safe house, feeling the weight of public scrutiny for the first time in his life. It was one thing to be anonymous, to help people quietly and fade back into the mountains. It was entirely different to have his face on television, his past dissected, his character questioned by people who'd never met him. Agent Chen visited regularly, bringing updates and checking on his mental state. "You need to understand," she said during one visit, "that this is part of their strategy. They can't attack the evidence, it's too solid, so they attack you and Sarah. They make the public question whether you're trustworthy, whether you had ulterior motives. It's classic reputation destruction." "Is it working?" Jack asked. "With some people, yes, but with most, no. The evidence is too damning." and there's something about your story that resonates. The mountain man who stopped to help, the granddaughter honoring her grandfather's dying wish. It's compelling. It's human.
3 weeks after the vault was opened, the first arrest was made. A former state environmental official named Douglas Waverley was taken into custody on charges of accepting bribes and falsifying inspection reports. Within 48 hours, he'd cut a deal, agreeing to testify against others in exchange for reduced charges. The dominoes had started to fall. Jack watched the news coverage with something like vindication. Waverley had been one of the names in Michael Thornton's documents, one of the officials who'd taken money to look the other way while communities were poisoned. Now he'd flipped, and his testimony would lead to others. But the real breakthrough came when a second whistleblower emerged. A woman named Patricia Hammond, who'd worked as a legal secretary for Consolidated Mining in the 1980s, came forward with her own cache of documents. She'd kept them hidden for 40 years, terrified of retaliation, but Sarah's courage had inspired her to speak. "I watched what they did to families who complained," Hammond said in a televised interview. "I watched them destroy lives, and I did nothing because I was afraid. But this young woman, Sarah Thornton, she wasn't afraid, and if she can be brave, so can I." The combination of Michael Thornton's evidence and Hammond's documents created an irrefutable case. Federal prosecutors announced a grand jury investigation. The state AG opened parallel proceedings, and slowly, painfully, the machinery of justice began to grind forward. Jack was released from protective custody after 5 weeks, deemed safe enough to return to normal life with regular check-ins from federal marshals. He drove back to his cabin on a cold December morning, the mountains dusted with the first snow of winter. The cabin looked exactly as he'd left it, but everything felt different. He walked through the rooms, touching familiar objects, his coffee pot, his worn couch, the tools hanging on pegboard in his workshop. They were the same, but he wasn't. That evening, as snow fell softly outside, Jack built a fire and sat on his porch watching the forest fade into white. His phone buzzed with a call from Sarah. "You made it home," she said. "Yeah, you?" "Still in Charleston. The lawyers want me nearby for the grand jury proceedings, but they say I can leave by Christmas." She paused. "Jack, there's something I need to tell you. The environmental groups, the ones helping with the lawsuit, they want to create a foundation, the Michael Thornton Foundation for Environmental Justice. They want me to be the director." "That's incredible," Jack said. "They want you on the board. They say your story, what you did, it's part of this. They want you involved." Jack watched the snow fall, thinking about what that would mean. Board meetings, public appearances, being part of something bigger than himself, something ongoing and visible and demanding. "I don't know," he said honestly. "That's not really who I am." "Maybe it's who you could be." Her voice was soft. "You spent 5 years hiding in those mountains, Jack. You told me yourself you were running from responsibility, but you stopped running when it mattered. Maybe it's time to stop for good." After they hung up, Jack sat in the silence of his cabin, wrestling with the question. He'd left search and rescue because he couldn't handle the weight anymore, couldn't handle watching people die despite his best efforts, couldn't handle the responsibility of other people's lives in his hands. But helping Sarah had reminded him that the weight had meaning. That responsibility, chosen freely, was different than responsibility thrust upon you. And that maybe the problem wasn't the burden itself, but believing he had to carry it alone. The grand jury proceedings took 3 months. Jack testified twice, each time recounting the events that had led to the vault's opening. Sarah testified 5 times, walking federal prosecutors through her grandfather's evidence page by page, document by document. By March, the indictments came. 7 people were charged with various crimes: bribery, conspiracy, environmental violations, obstruction of justice. Among them were 2 former state senators, 3 corporate executives, and 2 environmental officials. The charges carried potential sentences ranging from 5 to 25 years. Consolidated Mining Corporation filed for bankruptcy, claiming the legal costs and settlements would destroy the company. Environmental groups argued it was a ploy to avoid paying damages. The courts would sort it out, but the message was clear: The cover-up had finally collapsed under its own weight. Jack was in his workshop rebuilding a carburetor when Agent Chen called with news. "We found something," she said. "In Michael Thornton's personal effects. A letter addressed to you." To me, he didn't know I existed. "It's addressed to whoever helps Sarah." He wrote several letters, apparently, for different scenarios. This one was hidden in a safety deposit box with instructions to deliver it if someone assisted his granddaughter in opening the vault. 2 days later, Jack held the letter in his hands. The paper was old, the handwriting shaky, written by a man who knew he was dying. He opened it carefully and read, "To whoever helps Sarah, if you're reading this, then my granddaughter found the courage I lacked. She opened the vault I sealed, and you stood beside her when it would have been easier to walk away. I don't know who you are, friend, stranger, professional investigator, but I know what you are. Someone who believes truth matters more than comfort. I spent 33 years gathering evidence against evil men, but I spent it alone, in secret, paralyzed by fear. Fear of losing my life, my safety, my peace, and in protecting myself, I failed to protect anyone else. By the time I found courage, everyone I loved was gone, driven away by the very men I pretended to serve. I'm writing this letter to tell you something I wish someone had told me. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite it. And it's always easier when you're not alone. Thank you for standing with my granddaughter. Thank you for being the partner I never found. Thank you for proving that one person choosing not to walk away can change everything. Whatever comes next, lawsuits, threats, attempts to discredit you, remember this: you've already won. The moment you opened that vault, the moment you chose truth over safety, you won. Everything else is just details. With gratitude from a man who waited too long, Michael Thornton. Jack read the letter 3 times, each time feeling the weight of those words settle deeper. Michael Thornton had spent 33 years alone with his secret, watching it poison him from the inside. But he'd done it so that someday someone might have the chance he never took. That evening, Jack called Sarah. "I'll do it," he said. "The foundation, the board, all of it. I'm in." He could hear the smile in her voice. "Really? Your grandfather wrote me a letter. It made me realize something. He spent 33 years hiding because he was alone. We don't have to do that. We've got each other and everyone else who's joining this fight. That changes everything." The Michael Thornton Foundation for Environmental Justice launched on a warm day in May, exactly 1 year after Sarah had driven into Ridgeway looking for answers. The ceremony was held at a community center in one of the towns most affected by the contamination, now receiving clean water for the first time in 40 years. Jack stood at the back of the room, uncomfortable in the button-down shirt Sarah had insisted he wear. The place was packed. Families, activists, journalists, lawyers, even some of the federal agents who'd worked the case. Sarah took the stage, no longer the exhausted, terrified woman Jack had met on that mountain road. She'd grown into this role, found strength in her grandfather's legacy, and courage in the fight itself. "This foundation exists because one man refused to forget," she said. "Because he documented evil even when he couldn't stop it. Because he believed that someday someone would have the courage to act. But it also exists because of all of you, the families who came forward, the lawyers who worked pro bono, the journalists who told the truth, and especially one man who chose to help a stranger when everyone told him not to." She looked directly at Jack. "Jack Harmon taught me that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about choosing to do the right thing even when you're terrified. It's about not driving past someone who needs help, even when helping them costs you everything." The room erupted in applause. Jack felt his face flush, uncomfortable with the attention, but Sarah wasn't done. "This foundation will provide legal assistance to communities fighting environmental injustice. It will fund independent water testing and health studies. It will support whistleblowers who risk everything to expose corporate crimes. And it will exist as a reminder that secrets only stay buried when good people choose to look away." More applause.
People were standing now, and Jack found himself pulled to the front of the room, shaking hands, receiving thanks from people whose lives had been changed by what he and Sarah had uncovered. One older woman grabbed his hand and held it tight. "My husband died of cancer in 1994. The doctors said it was from the water, but nobody would listen. Now they're listening. Now people believe us. Thank you."
Jack could barely speak. "I'm sorry I couldn't help sooner." "You helped when it mattered," she said. "That's enough." After the ceremony, Jack and Sarah stood outside in the parking lot, watching the sun set over the mountains that had hidden so many secrets for so long. "You know this is just the beginning," Sarah said. "The trials will take years. Some people will get away with it. Some families will never get justice." "I know," Jack said, "but we gave them a chance. That's more than they had before." She turned to look at him. "What are you going to do now? Go back to your cabin, live quiet again?" Jack thought about that. A year ago, that's exactly what he would have done. But he'd changed. The man who'd stopped on that mountain road was different from the man standing here now. "I think I'll split my time," he said. "Help with the foundation, work with communities that need someone who knows how to navigate these mountains and these systems. But yeah, I'll go back to my cabin. Some things don't need to change." "Just as long as you don't disappear completely," Sarah said. "I'm going to need help running this thing, and you're the only person I trust to tell me when I'm wrong." Jack smiled. "Deal." They stood in comfortable silence. Two people who'd been strangers just a year ago, now bound by something deeper than friendship. Shared purpose, shared struggle, shared victory. The parking lot emptied, and the mountains turned purple in the fading light. Somewhere in those hills, Jack's cabin waited. Somewhere in Charleston, Sarah's new office waited. And somewhere across the state, families were drinking clean water for the first time in decades. Children were growing up without fear of poisoning, and the machinery of justice was slowly, painfully crushing the people who'd thought themselves untouchable. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was progress, and progress mattered. 6 months later, the first major conviction came down. Douglas Waverley, the environmental official who'd flipped, received 3 years in prison for bribery and falsifying reports. It wasn't enough, not really, but it was something. And it sent a message. The cover-up was truly over. Jack was in his cabin when the news broke, chopping wood for winter. His phone buzzed with texts from Sarah, from Agent Chen, from lawyers and activists. He read them all, felt the collective sense of vindication, then set the phone down and went back to work. That evening he sat on his porch with coffee, watching the first snow of winter begin to fall. The mountains were silent, peaceful, holding their secrets the way they always had. But some secrets had been torn free, dragged into light, exposed to justice. His phone rang. "Sarah, you see the news?" she asked. "I did." "We won, Jack. It's not everything, but it's something." "It's more than something," he said. "It's proof that the system can still work, that truth still matters, that people can't bury evil forever." They talked for a while about the Foundation's next steps, about other communities reaching out for help, about the growing movement of environmental whistleblowers finding courage in Sarah's example. After they hung up, Jack stood and walked to the edge of his porch. He looked out at the forest, at the mountains that had been his refuge and his prison for 5 years. He'd come here to hide, to escape responsibility, to live alone with his failures, but a stranger had driven up that mountain road, and everything had changed. He thought about Michael Thornton, laboring in secret for 33 years, documenting crimes he couldn't stop, waiting for someone to carry the truth forward. He thought about Sarah, brave enough to honor her grandfather's dying wish even when it put her life at risk. And he thought about himself, the man who'd almost driven past, who'd almost stayed safe, who'd almost chosen comfort over courage. Almost. But he hadn't. And that single choice had changed everything, not just for him and Sarah, but for dozens of families, for entire communities, for the concept of justice itself. Jack Harmon had learned something in that year of chaos and courage. You don't have to be fearless to be brave. You don't have to be perfect to do good.
You just have to choose in the moment when it matters, not to look away.
The snow fell heavier now, blanketing the mountains in white. Spring would come again, and with it more work, more fights, more people needing help. But for tonight, Jack allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Peace. Not the false peace of isolation, but the real peace that comes from standing for something, from fighting for something, from being part of something bigger than yourself. He'd stopped to help a stranger on a storm-soaked road, and in doing so, he'd helped expose a secret that powerful men had killed to protect. He'd helped bring justice to families who'd been poisoned and ignored. And he'd helped prove that sometimes, the most powerful thing in the world is one person refusing to drive past when everyone else says you should. The mountain man who'd been warned not to help had found something buried beneath the earth. But what he'd really found was buried inside himself: the courage to stand, the strength to fight, and the heart to keep going even when the outcome was uncertain. And that, he realized, was the real treasure all along. Anyone can change the world if they're willing to stop when others drive past, to stand when others sit down, to speak when others stay silent. The choice is always there, waiting in every moment, every intersection, every storm-soaked road where someone needs help. Jack Harmon made that choice. And in doing so, he reminded us all that heroism isn't about being extraordinary. It's about being present, being willing, and being brave enough to act when action is needed most. As the first winter storm of the season blanketed the Appalachian Mountains in white, Jack returned to his cabin not as a man hiding from the world, but as someone who'd learned that the greatest strength isn't found in isolation. It's found in standing with others, fighting for truth, and refusing to let injustice hide in the dark. The vault beneath the mountain had been sealed for 43 years, but it only took one person asking for help and another person choosing to give it to bring decades of corruption crashing down. Because in the end, courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about helping someone even when you're terrified. It's about opening doors everyone says should stay closed. It's about believing that one person, one choice, one moment of compassion can echo through time and change everything for everyone who comes after. For Jack and for Sarah, the road that began with a warning not to help had become a testament to why helping is always worth the risk. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible true stories are waiting for you. Click to continue the journey with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that courage can change the world, one choice at a time.